All right. In this podcast, I just felt like talking about how nostalgia is never accurate for me. Naturally, it's not accurate. I could force it to be accurate with like my reasoning mind, but by nature, it always exaggerates the amazingness of the past. I think back to those moments, and I'm like, man, they were good moments. But I think back to them too, and I think they were filled with so much uncertainty, so much suffering and worry. It's just that even though I was younger, it's like it wasn't even worth it. I was stupider. I was smarter in many ways, smarter than I am now in some ways. Like, fresh out of geometry class in 10th grade, I was better at geometry than I am now that I'm older. But even some extremely practical things I was smarter with. There were other things that I just could not see yet, though. And I would not like to not be able to see them again, like if I could go back in time or something. But it would be cool to go back in time to your nostalgic moments, you know? Which, if you went back in time, I guess what would happen is you would gain the brain and the mind of your previous self. But it would be cool to put your present self in your former body so that you could still have any of the wisdom. It was like I said, for me at least, I love the past in reflection more than I loved it when it was my present. So, if I could time travel, I would want my present brain so that I could just bask in the nostalgia that only my present brain knows. I would not want my past brain again, where I'm missing all of my present knowledge because I already lived that experience with that past state of mind, you know? And there were like anxieties that had not overcome yet, and I sort of took the moment for granted. I wasn't expecting nostalgia to ever dwell on that moment someday either, you know? So I would need my present brain if I was time traveling to the past, or more like my present mind, I would need. I would technically want to be operating my past physical brain again, and like the same head, but somehow with my present mind, if that makes sense. Like, I don't mean the kind of time travel where my 26-year-old self steps out of the time machine and can walk over to my 15-year-old self and like freak him out. The kind of time travel I would want, that might be fun too in other instances, but just the kind I'm talking about now, I mean, I would actually want to be in the body of my 15-year-old self so that every biological or developmental effect on sensation, it would exactly satisfy my memory. Even the neurological differences of the underdeveloped brain, I would want to experience again, but just somehow magically still have my 26-year-old mind so that I can know the nostalgia and not just redo taking the moment for granted. You know, plus, I mean, I would need my present knowledge if I was time traveling because how would I even know to come back to the time machine and come back to the future if my wisdom of time machine was wiped? But wanting to return to the past has this weird implication of unintentionally also wanting a lot of people to not be alive. Like, anyone who was born after the past times you're daydreaming about, it's weird. Like, I've thought about this before. How, like, I'm trapped about how to word it. Because you don't want them dead, but you sort of don't want them alive. But not because you don't like them. It's like I almost have this sympathy for the advent of their existence. Or, like, I would not want to go enjoy times where they were nothing yet. And yet I still really do want to. For the sake of what was existing before them. I guess if you could just trust that they will be born, it would feel fine to go back in time to before them. But maybe the first time travel won't be real. It will be in like a virtual reality computer simulation, you know? You won't have to worry about the actuality of people. It will be like Google Earth, maybe, but with more detail. Where Street View isn't a picture, it's a video. And you can go in and feel and touch and stuff like that. I mean, if a computer was powerful enough, it could record the whole Earth, even the movement of bugs, and just deduce some 3D simulation that is 100% realistic. But it would be too invasive when you realize houses would maybe be in the VR simulation. And like people's actions in the privacy of their own homes would be studied with some thermal surveillance or something. Honestly, whatever scientists invent something like that would probably keep it secret. But in my memories of the past, Christmases felt more Christmassy, and summers felt more summery. But when I was in those moments, they felt normal. And I felt the same nostalgia about even older Christmases. Like in present moment Christmases, I'm doing my best to feel the warmth that I remember from older Christmases. But they're never really exactly as great as memory. But eventually it will be the memory, you know? Maybe your nostalgia is correct though, and it's not exaggerating. Like maybe the past did feel better in the moment it was happening versus how the present feels now. Like I remember being so happy in certain past moments that I became like super conscious of how happy I was while it was happening, not after. But if I have to choose, I think my nostalgia is exaggerating how great the past was in almost every case. Even the most convincing cases, like love and crushing, for example. It seemed like they felt better in the past, or at least the spark phase was always more eager to occur, with less and less justification. Like, I believed in fairy tales more, in a sense, but that did make my emotions and expectations more adorable to myself, at least as far as I remember. So my soul would just throw itself into the spark before love with no hesitation and with such full power. Nowadays, it's like either I'm wiser and I don't waste spark power, or like the spark ejector is less powerful. But really, what I'm trying to say is I think my nostalgia is exaggerating. And truly, sparks now are just as great. I just know that I can still love hard and still feel strong sparks, but I hate to admit I'm jealous of my past ones because it feels like they were slightly stronger in the moment, even if they truly were not. My nostalgia is so persuasive over my mind that I can present a whole case that past love was better. I think I'll do that, even though at the end of it I won't believe it. Really, I just believe nostalgia exaggerates. But I mean, this whole persuasion that I guess I'm getting ready to try to make about love feeling better when you're younger will probably offend older people trying to find love or who are in love, or they'll disagree. But again, I don't even agree with myself. I'm just gonna let my nostalgia do the talking, like it's right for a second. So, doesn't it seem like falling in love when you're young feels better? Or it's like it is better than when you're older. It's because when you're young, the love just comes so much quicker and you fall head over heels more. I mean, to put it another way, it's like when mature old love works out, it does work out more often, I think. But young love just feels better. It's like when you're young and naive, it feels so great because the world hasn't taught you yet. You know, the person you're falling in love with has some probability of breaking your heart. And you haven't learned what the chances are of them breaking your heart yet. And you haven't learned that your life is not a fairy tale yet. But another way to put it, a metaphoric way to put it, is just imagine like the very first flight with the Wright brothers. That is metaphorically young love. It must have been so exciting to watch that plane take off. But now imagine in like 2000 whatever, going to an airport and watching airline jets take off. It's cool, but it's utterly mundane. Even though they take off so much more perfect and reliably. And yet, the excitement for the spectators isn't anywhere near what it was for the Wright brothers' flight. So yeah, it's like the perfect mature airline jet is metaphorically mature people falling in love. And the Wright brothers plane, in that metaphor, generally speaking, those young people are more like reckless sexually. They haven't learned that cheating isn't worth it, that it's too difficult to keep it secret, and that what you have is about the same as what you're looking for when you cheat, you know, like hookup wise or partner wise. You know, like they bang enough and they get too used to each other's body, and they haven't learned how to reconcile contrast with loyalty. Like, take a physical break without breaking up, you know? Or learn the right way to, like, bring back physical longing. Because it can feel the same again. But despite all of these imperfections of knowing less when you're younger, the good parts still impacted you like a fairy tale for reasons I'll expand on. But in the airline jet metaphor, the older people both have their own selves under control more in a way that really is conducive to relationship stability. Plus, their own expectations about each other are more realistic because of all the experience. Generally speaking, I think this is all generally true. And despite all of these improvements, the good parts just don't hit you the same that those young love nostalgic memories seem. And I'll try to explain why in a second. But think of it like this too, like, why are fairy tales usually with young characters? To put it simply, because it sells better. Like the fairy tale movies. Why does it sell better? Because it's better to watch. Okay. Imagine looking at it from the perspective of it actually happening to you. Like with these young characters, it's better to look at. And is it not probably better than when you're older if it does work out? But besides that, there are reasons why it's better. It's like the blossom of physical appearance before any wilting looks better. The hormones are stronger. The awareness that there's more time left in life to pack dates into. It's like with anything, the first time is best as long as the first time is done right. I remember the first roller coaster I went on. My emotions were overreacting with attentiveness, and I was amazed. After that, new roller coasters aren't as fun. And that roller coaster wasn't even as fun as that first time on that roller coaster, where I was just being introduced to the experience itself. But just as a sort of theory, I think the first time you do something, your nature handles your perception of it more. And once you've done something a lot, your nurtured memory handles your perception of it. And what really feels better? Like, if you're 35 and you have the perfect set of stimuli to fall in love, that equal set of stimuli makes a trippier, deeper love when you're 18. Assuming everything is like theoretically the same besides hormones and stuff. Like, say in some perfect theory, you're financially comfortable at 18, you're perfectly compatible with your partner, and every external circumstance supports you being together. Then imagine 35-year-olds with the exact theoretically perfect external circumstances. And you're perfectly psychologically compatible. I just personally think that 18-year-olds will feel it deeper because of certain extra internal circumstances like hormones and a sense of extra wealth of lifespan left to love in. I don't know, it's like maybe less life left when you're older makes you appreciate experiences more. But I'm just speaking for myself. And when I was young, fantasizing about many decades of life left sort of was my love's sidekick in dopamine release. Like, You know how there's a phrase at the end of fairy tales that goes, "Then they lived happily ever after." There's no famous saying that goes, "Then they lived happily briefly after," because they were determined to appreciate the little time left because they were old. You know, it's just this ever after concept means a long time, which just fits better naturally when you get started young. Appropriately young, but still young. But besides that, you have extra health and energy when you're young. But also this thing which is hard to explain, where all perceptions feel better when you're young. So like even if the love is imperfect, it can feel as good or better than later love that is more stable with wisdom. Kind of like how the Wright brothers' airplane was way crappier than an F-16 Blue Angels display. Yet, it filled spectators with an almost equal awe just because flying was new. You know, I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong or just speaking for myself and it's different for other people, but I just know that love or even crushes seemed magical when I was younger. Or so much more powerful that it made me almost schizophrenic, where songs on the radio were about my crush more and other things I would notice in the world that would relate to some thought I was having about my crush. Like her and my initials would be carved into the wood at the end of the pier on a vacation. And some stranger put it there. I didn't put it there. But the whole walk down the pier, I was thinking about her before I even discovered it. It's that kind of stuff too, where like beginner's luck seems real for beginning love. But when you've eventually loved so many different times, it's like the source of luck calls you the boy who cried wolf. It doesn't believe you anymore. And there's less magic in the license plates on the road. Or perhaps the magic is there, but you've gotten so bored of it that you're like cured, you know? Her name's Olivia, and One Direction comes out with the song Olivia right after you start crushing on her and you're looking for songs to help cope with your emotions. But you begin rolling your eyes and calling it coincidence nowadays instead of real magic, because over the years you've gotten experience with like probability and you're like, hey, after 10 years of paying attention, I realize that every couple of weeks something weird happens. It's just chance, not magic. You know? Which is a more boring perspective, even if it's supposedly healthier psychologically. But there was just so much better about the spark that starts love when I was like 18 or whatever. I guess I'm over explaining, but to summarize, the concept of love, like I said, was comparable to my first roller coaster. I was like, whoa, so that's what that is. And it never felt so new again, you know? The newness of the experience was really cool. Then hormones were stronger and, you know, I guess health was better. Energy was more, sort of. and wealth of time left was definitely a thing to appreciate. And I saw magic stuff more, or I saw stuff as magic more. But this whole talk, this love talk, started when I was debating is if nostalgia is exaggerating or not. I think nostalgia is exaggerating. Everything I just explained about love feeling better when I was younger just shows how nostalgia is powerful enough to make me find reasoning that the past really was better. Honestly, I think nostalgia is exaggerating how love felt when I was younger. There's definitely still synchronicity and magic and stuff happening as you get older. I might talk about that phenomenon in a later podcast. But synchronicity just seems dependent on sincerity. So if the love is sincere, the magic or lunacy can come back in full. So nostalgia exaggerates some things, and in reality, those things are exactly the same now as they were then. But there are other things about young love that was for sure different. And I think nostalgia is just glomming onto the difference and saying the difference was better when it wasn't necessarily. Like the newness of being romantically in love while younger was different from now. But is newness necessarily better than being experienced? And if newness is so great, well, there is a newness to the concept of being experienced. That's a cool newness too, but I'm being confusing. I still think two young lovers' wealth of time left to picture themselves is wonderful. But if you fall in love old, a feeling of making up for lost time might be just as satisfying in a different way. And, well, physical appearance was slightly different, but my nostalgia acts like MILFs and DILFs are not even a thing. And as far as hormones go, I think the extra hormones when I was 18 were a lot for growing. It's a myth that they're for lust. Because I feel just as horny now. I don't know how, but I am. But I should not talk so explicit. But also, women say they're hornier in like middle age. You see, I just think in so many ways, nostalgia exaggerates how great things were. And truly, the present is just as good. But my brain is tired, and I think I'm going to turn this podcast off for now.